2009, Susannah Cahalan was a young reporter for the New York Post, when one day she began to feel unwell. Shortly after, she was hospitalized, and a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia followed. When her transfer to a psychiatry facility was about to be formalized, her doctor decided to run some further tests. At the end, Susan was diagnosed with an autoimmune encephalitis. From the moment of her misdiagnosis, Susan's interest in psychiatry developed, and she began her search for a definition of insanity. Between all of the medical practices, psychiatry is the one characterized by the most uncertainty and limitation in the ability to cure. For centuries, doctors have struggled not only to treat insanity, but to diagnose it, recognize it, and give a definition of it. All kinds of convenient diagnoses were given to people who didn't conform to society. A substantial portion of people admitted to psychiatric hospital in this period died between months and even weeks of being admitted. Patients were treated worse than animals. The treatments were cruel and inhuman. They were chained up, whipped, and starved, trying to punish the disease out of them. Analysts then started to focus on the body and trying to target and isolate the madness. Everything remained still until Freud. Treat the underlying conflict and you treat the person. This was Freud's idea. By the 1970s, nearly every professor in psychiatry trained as an analyst. The patients who needed help the most were left behind, while analysts left mental hospitals to comfortably choose their patients, mostly white and wealthy. In the same year, David Rosenan, a Stanford psychologist, initiated an innovative study, and 7 other pseudo-patients whose identity remained unknown went undercover into asylum all over America to test symptoms firsthand. They all presented with the same symptoms, voices in their head, and were all diagnosed with schizophrenia, except one who was pronounced with manic depression. Once they got admitted, it was up to them to get discharged and to prove themselves sane. It's interesting to underline how none of the pseudo-patients was declared cured after their time in the hospital. In fact, the term in remission was used. This means that once you were diagnosed with a mental illness, there was nothing you could do nor say to make disappear that label. Though Rosenan's study helped proving to the public opinion that mental hospitals belonged to a primitive era, the process of closing this institution had already started with the birth of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's sister, Rosemary. Rosemary was born with a severe neurological deficiency due to the lack of oxygen during birth, and at the age of 23 she underwent a procedure of lobotomy, which caused her the loss of the ability to talk and walk. The state started discharging and closing hospitals, and the total number of patients in this kind of institution dropped by 50% in only 10 years. A set of problems arose. Those with the most severe forms of disorders were left behind and cast aside by the same government who closed those institutions. And psychiatry still couldn't find a scientific approach to support its practices. If people with mental disorders before were locked up into asylums, today nearly 30% of them spend their lives into prisons. People with a serious mental illness are less likely to make bail, and they spend longer amount of time into jails. Even if psychiatry hospitals have nearly disappeared, the only true difference with the past is that now the cruelty, the brutality and the mistreatment of patients with mental disorders happen into prisons. Specialists and researchers now want to approach the diseases in the same way as they do with cancer, by acknowledging the unique characteristic of each case. This new approach partially comes from genetics and the understanding that more than one gene is associated with each disease. We're now talking of genetic overlap even in the psychiatric field. The more we know about the interaction between the brain and the rest of the body, the more we will discover about these diseases. And I wonder if one day we will be really able to answer what's insanity.